Hello, I'm Dr. Vijay Murthy. I'm with Maya Tiwari, the founder of Wise Earth School. Today's discussion is Ahimsa, non-violence, non-hurt, dependent on what we eat?
What a wonderful and deep subject it is. Earlier we were talking about ahimsa, food modalities, movements, etc. Ahimsa is a vast topic covering millennia. It comes down from the ancient wisdom traditions, particularly Vedas, which then influenced the Jain tradition, the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, and we can translate it roughly as non-violence, but it's far greater than that. It's more than a principle and a concept. It is said that ahimsa, paramo dharmaha, is meaning it is the greatest universal value in life. It cannot be commoditized, it cannot be made into something that's just a principle here and a principle there, and we shan't commercialize it either, although it is extremely popular and it is a beautiful reminder in the present time for the dharma, the humanitarian, organic dharma that we must all contribute to and maintain.
You know, while a lot of us do understand ahimsa or non-hurt or non-violence or not causing any injury to other forms of lives, including humans and animals and all forms of lives, could be plants as well, the main confusion is that, or confusion of where clarity is needed is my application of ahimsa dependent on what I eat or what someone else eats?
No, and in fact it's a short answer. It's not dependent on what we eat. It's not dependent on any one activity or personalized activity. It's not dependent, it is in fact dependent on a greater, broader human aspect of our own individuality, our own humanness, our own sentiency. It is a principle of consciousness in that there are certain activities that we can do, obviously, that will enhance the ahimsa recognition, ahimsa realization in our own lives. In Wise Earth Ayurveda, I've introduced the sadhanas, the sadhana practice, where we do a lot of work with the good earth, with our hands. We really minimize and absolutely try not to use a lot of electronic instrument, a lot of electrical energies and other things that do leave a footprint in our atmosphere. We dig into the good earth. We grind our spices by hand in mortar and pestle, with the stone being the foundation of our lives. These practices are only to imbue and cultivate within ourselves that awareness of ahimsa. And of course, the better choices we make, the conscious choices we make, not creating hurt with the animal, because ahimsa most of all means non-injury, non-harm. From time immemorial, we have advocated the lessening of hurt. Of course, in human life and in all the different species, we cannot completely eliminate hurt. And so in the Vedic tradition itself, the way that we handle that was with great consciousness and flexibility. And the flexibility, for instance, during wartime, there was the lawful or the political ahimsa, which is it made it lawful for you to respond with arms. Or in the times of those people who lived in the forest, ancient folks who lived in the forest and now who continue to bring this method back, that raced with the animals, but they killed out of the survival need, and also that there was one thing that's different with the killing of that animal. It was with reverence. You know, sacrifices are noted in the Vedas, sacrifices of animal life, that was done in a sacrificial way, through a ceremony, with the reverence of asking the permission of the universe to do all of that. So when we're looking at ahimsa, we've got to take the broad scale of the value that it brings to human life, rather than just commercialize it and make it an imprint in a movement, or an imprint in any kind of movement. I'm not talking about just the food movement, I'm talking about any kind of movement.
So what I hear is, in the Vedas, the word ahimsa, which comes from the root hins or han, is to harm, to kill. Initially was not very largely elaborated, but then as more and more Vedic scriptures were available, then the whole concept took a completely new form.
Yes.
And it's interesting you are talking about ecological footprint. So because ahimsa or non-violence is multidimensional, it can cause confusion to individuals as to which dimension of ahimsa am I talking about. For instance, Gandhi, he used ahimsa mostly in the context of the politics or satyagraha for freedom. So he engaged in non-violence from that perspective.
Yes.
Whereas Jains, they look at absolute ahimsa, where you don't even cause any harm to plants. Therefore, you don't even eat root vegetables because you are destroying the entire
Yes,
plant.
and they go about sweeping the actual street of any little insects that they may not see, or they avoid going out in the dark and things like that. And ahimsa in that aspect is one of the original aspects of it. But we're not saying that in order to do, you have to do that in order to be perfect in ahimsa. We're not here in a competition as to be perfect in ahimsa. We are here in a way to develop our sentiency as human beings. And ahimsa is an absolute pilot light. It is an absolute beacon for us to aim toward. And that beacon cannot be just individualized completely into my ahimsa is this. The basic tenet is that we have always used it in terms of vak, speech, karma, action, and deeds, and also in being conscious, with making conscious choices. And the underpinning that held it together in any circumstance was hurt not, do not create injury for someone else in thought, speech, or deeds. Do not try to avoid that. But it also doesn't mean someone is ravaging your community, let's lay down and take it. So that's where we have to look at the dynamics of ahimsa. In the Mahabharata, no one lied down and took that war. There's over 100 mention of ahimsa in the Mahabharata. There are several mentions in the earlier Shruti of the Upanishads, but so much of it is in the Dharma Shastra that tells us how to live our lives in peaceable ways. Look, it's wonderful, going back to the subject of veganism, which we did the last time. It is wonderful that we are conscious about the carbon footprint, that we are conscious about preserving Mother Earth, that we are conscious about the five elements, the air, the water, the sky, the river, the forest, and the animals. We love that about the vegan movement. What I said the last time is that we just can't then have what I call consciousness by association and call it ahimsa. And consciousness by association is not just with a movement, it's not just with activism, it's wonderful that we can be conscious by association. Someone or something that influences us to be conscious is very, very good. Better we're influenced by consciousness than by a lack of consciousness.
Because the original Vedic concept of ahimsa, because the very word ahimsa actually comes from Vedas.
Yes, it sounds good.
And in Vedas, and also in the later applications of Vedas in the form of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism, ahimsa is a virtue.
Absolutely. A value and a virtue.
It's a personal virtue. And even within this personal virtue, the extent of what would amount to hinsa, or the opposite of ahimsa, actually was not the same for every individual.
No.
For instance, monks had a far greater
responsibility and
responsibility
accountability
towards ahimsa
yes.
than the general public.
Yes.
I'm looking at it historically, but then when we take that as a personal virtue, as it actually rose from the rules of morality.
Yes, we can't really all do the same thing. We're not all at the same transitional stages of our different karma. And from Vedic thought, which is what we're dealing with at all times in these discussions, Vijay, we are looking at minimizing the amount of papa karma or poor karmas that we accumulate. So ahimsa actually, the reason for humanity to take ahimsa as a guiding light, as a beacon, is basically we want to all reduce the impact and the imprint of poor karma or poor karmic samskaras or imprints that follow us into other forms and births.
So what would be, because Wise Earth School is founded on the ethos of ahimsa, and then when I look at research data, for producing 1 calorie of beef, we use about 40 calories of ecological fuel energy. And if you're using milk or milk products, then for 1 calorie, it's around 16 or 17 calories of energy. And for grains, for 1 calorie, it's only about 2 or 2.6 calories.
Yes.
So what's your comment on,
The comment
just considering
is that
the food?
we have to change animal husbandry in the world, starting with the US and wherever else it's broadcast, it's animal farming. It has created incredible damage to the surface of the earth, the sky, the water, and everything else. So the production of commercial milk, Vedic understanding and Vedic ethos is against that. We are never against anything really, the anti-this and the anti-that, but we would do everything we can as well to protect it. How many goshalas do we have in India where the goshalas for the protection of the cow? We actually have thousands, and it's a burgeoning, it's a reformation and a burgeoning stuff that we have again, where people, tenders, innocent people, it's poor people, not wealthy people, but good-hearted people who want to contribute to their largest of ahimsa are taking on goshalas. There's states now in North India that's where there's thousands of acres of organic growing. There is a lot of conscious reality that is happening.
I'd like you to clarify something, which is raising livestock, as in cows or any other animals, for human consumption, or is it just to protect the animals? Because one of the research shows that raising livestock causes 65% of all nitrous oxide emission, and nitrous oxide has 296 times the global warming potential to that of carbon dioxide.
So basically, we need to go back to the ethos of Vedic principles or ancient wisdom principles, which is we are not looking at livestock, we're looking at a certain animal. We're looking at, in this instance, at cows, and we're looking at feeding them, at grazing them, at having them have the leisure and pleasure of a good life, of a healthful life, and then use the feces, which we consider not just mala and waste, we consider to daub our grounds to prevent bacteria, which is the way we have been using it. We are looking at using it again into creating fuel for fire. We are looking at using their urine to actually produce certain amount of medicines, because their urine is also medicinal when the cow is treated properly and in harmony with everything in nature. And then we would not have these emissions, because we are actually using the entire reality of that animal and all of the riches that it's giving us, including its milk. So we have to go back to a reconstruction of how the cow is to be treated, if we're taking that animal alone, but how all animals are to be treated. And the cow in particular is considered sacred in the ancient traditions of Europe as well, because it gives us so much wealth. And now there's so many centers in South India in particular that are reusing the cows are in the pastures, the goshalas are happy, they're happily tending to the cows, to the calf, to the milking, to not excessively milking the cow, and using whatever milk the cow is happy to give them. They're actually rebonding with that relationship again, because the cow, for one, love human attention and human love. And they have actually a reciprocity going on. They love to give some of whatever they can give to the actual ecological wellness of this earth, and especially to human beings.
So I come back to the same question. Are you then supporting animal agriculture? Because that amounts to about 18% of all greenhouse gases that are produced.
I am not supporting any form of agriculture. I am supporting the reformation of bringing back the organic tending to husbandry to our animals, like we are doing now in thousands of goshalas, old and new. There's a goshala in Ramana Maharshi's center, for instance, and it is so wonderful to see how tenders from the west, from the east, from everywhere else take care. The guests actually contribute to the care of the goshalas there, and it's so beautiful to see that. So I have no support for the form of agriculture, so to speak. I'm not talking about anything commercial. I'm talking about going back to what the original knowledge-based systems were, and how we tended to our animals, how they became part of the community, how we used with great intelligence, for instance, the feces of the cow to dog with, or to fuel with, and all of these good things.
What about meat? For instance, there is still a large amount of the population where meat is one of the main foods, and in fact, 27% of the water footprint is because of meat production, and meat production is one of the leading causes for extinction of animal species.
We have never supported meat production and the slaying of animals. The Vedic wisdom has never protected that, never supported that. There were times when early sacrifices were made in Vedic period and pre-Vedic periods. But that should definitely, we should all advocate to not kill, not injure the animal. The amount of damage created by current commercial animal husbandry is without words. It's unthinkable. So, in the terms of ahimsa, ahimsa is definitely non-killing when we're looking at our food source. Ahimsa is about protecting life, protecting the life force, not just of humans, and not just of our forest and stationary gifts given to us, but definitely of the animals as well. And as we become more conscious in the movement, not in the movement, but in the movement of our own mind, as we become more conscious, then we are going to get to that point where more and more people recognize that it is not a good karma to kill and to eat the meat of the animal.
What I find fascinating is, in its most original context, ahimsa was not so much on non-killing. It was a virtue of non-hurt, be it in our communication, be it in our thinking, be it in our attitude, be it in our behavior, with everything,
starting
internal and external.
Starting with.
But why is the focus become so much about? Why do we today equate ahimsa as killing animals, or linked with non-killing animals? So,
well, I tell you why. First of all, ahimsa is about non-hurting of the self, where we can call it in the West self-love or self-respect.
At the cost of what?
And the reverence to self. The self being the entire universe. The self being you, me, not separate from you, and you not separate from that animal and all of that incredible consciousness. So when we are looking at focusing, look, we cannot blame any movement when they are moving toward understanding consciousness and protecting Mother Earth. Because we are concentrating more on it being meat, or ahimsa being what we eat, or ahimsa being what we say, because in our present time we have such a chaos, such a mix of violence. Because I don't know any other time in prehistory where we have been so barbarous to the animal kingdom, and to Mother Nature, and to the forest kingdom, and to the air and the water. So yes, there will be undue attention. When I say undue attention, there will be extreme attention, not undue, but extreme attention to certain aspects that are coming in as ahimsa. But we need to understand that the cultivation of ahimsa is within the self, and it is a cultivation. It's a quality we already have. It's like the sun giving light to both the terrible neighborhoods where there are gang wars going on, and the wonderful neighborhood where you can walk in gardens and celebrate the beauty of life. The sun doesn't choose which community to shed its light on. Ahimsa within the human specific spirit does not choose which activity I'm going to apply my ahimsa to today. We can choose it, but it has to be the overriding spirit of our humanity, of our humanitarianism. That is what it's about.
Comment a little bit on, what then is the difference between living ahimsa as one's dharma or one's purpose to living ahimsa as my lifestyle?
A lifestyle is a matter of choice, to a great extent, influenced by the things we love and the things we may have had in our belief systems and the things that can push us and drive us and whatever. But ahimsa as purpose, ahimsa as a single core purpose actually of dharma, of following dharma, is part of the human sentient gift. We all have it. We can translate it roughly in our conscience, the way that we respond to something when we see something unfair done, or injustice happening, or barbarism happening, as in the commercial animal husbandry. We can, we will and do become very emotional, and we respond in a way that all humans beings do, because it's part and parcel of the core value built into the sentiency of a human person.
So give me an example of where ahimsa is the guiding principle, much like ethics. I understand this from a research perspective, because there is nothing called absolute ethics, because ethics is very relative to the environment, to the person, to the situation, to the times.
Yes.
So I believe ahimsa is a similar thing. So can you give an example where ahimsa can be my guiding principle, but it doesn't have to be an absolute rule? Because I'm not talking about those who are able to apply it as an absolute rule, but those who
absolute
are
rules make us inflexible. Things change all the time, from one moment at a time, from the time we sat down to now. We have had amongst us, between us, and in the environment of where we are, several thousand changes, imperceptible and perceptible, both happening. We, as human sentient beings, adapt to those changes. We adapt automatically, mechanically almost, without even knowing that I'm adapting to this change and that change. When we become absolute about something, we freeze the absolute dynamism of what actually happens around the human aura. We freeze it. The vibrational field even becomes static. because we have made an absolute rule.
No, but how do I know that I'm actually treading the right path of ahimsa as my guiding light?
It feels good within. You get up feeling happy no matter what. You may have aches and pains, but there's a sense of happiness inside. There's a sense of joy, a sense of connection to the greater energies.
But is it dependent on what I eat?
It is not dependent on what we eat, although we need to be conscious of what we eat. That's it. There's a difference. We are conscious of what we eat, but what we eat is not an absolute rule to ahimsa. In that, the consciousness we apply to what we eat comes from some other source within us. And that source is the commitment to, we one day get up through perhaps difficult experiences, in my case through cancer and other things that happen later, and we renew. When I started the Living Ahimsa Peace Tour, World Tour, which still I will continue, it was from an awakening, a second awakening, I would say, later in my life, that forced me from the mountains of North Carolina to things that were changing there, politically, socially, economically, mostly economically. And if we look at ahimsa, ahimsa is an affix added to the main word, which is himsa. Himsa is to not kill or to not injure. And then we say, but we have to also do the opposite, which is So ahimsa means, no, we're not going to perform any of these things. But in nature, there is the law of extinction, there's the law of combat, there's so many laws. And when we apply this with a maturity, as we every day, when we take to a life of awareness and make that commitment, ahimsa vrata, or the vow of ahimsa as I call it, and as we use it through my peace tours and making mandalas with seeds, and the seed gives us back that seed memory, because ahimsa is a seed memory. It is doing simple things, it's getting up, it's looking at the sky, it's looking at Mother Nature, it's communing with the earth, it's choosing properly food that we eat, but there's no absolutes in it. If one thing isn't available, then something else that is salubrious or wholesome may be available. And the sense of flexibility of allowing nature to change as it changes, and us floating with that, flowing with, in synchronicity with that change, is very, very vital. That is ahimsa. That is following ahimsa. There are times when we would actually be angry and say something that is really not exactly non-hurting to each other, especially to the people that are close to us, that we trust enough to hurt.
Yeah.
Then basically, what are we going to do? Moan about it for an entire month? No. What we do is make amends, accept that we can do better, and try to do better next time.
Okay. Maya Tiwari, we need to come to an end. However, what I gather is that all the proponents of ahimsa through history, particularly ahimsa coming from the Vedic Indian subcontinent as a virtue, as a concept, Aurobindo had a different perspective. Gandhi had a different perspective. Vivekananda has a completely different perspective. These are modern
Martin
people.
Luther King had his perspective of it.
But what I like to know, to finish off, is what are the 3 key principles or tenets of Wise Earth School of Ayurveda's ahimsa, which you founded?
Well, the tenets, ahimsa is the foundation of the school, and all of the things that we do with reverence to Mother Nature, truthfulness.
So number 1 is respecting Mother Nature.
And number 2 is the truthfulness in our own relationship to self and the earth and each other. And the third would be to be in alignment with all of the energies that support. The alignment means that we are non-judgmental about anything. We're never anti anything. And that is because things change, people change, circumstances change. We could believe something so firmly in, but there is never that understanding that it can't change. We have to allow that room for it to change. I think humility, the development of humility is also the development of non-judgmentalism. And that is so very, very vital, because it doesn't make us better people and better human beings and special human beings to be more conscious. It really makes us more mature and way more humble. And I think those are the qualities when we stay close to the earth and when we do sadhana, when we're not using thousands of those sort of machines, although it's okay to use it, and I'm not saying you can't. It really, there's something with your hand in the earth, it just keeps you understanding that there's so little that we really know, even with all of the studies. And I've done major studies with the great scholars, and one in particular, and of the Vedas, and in Sanskrit. You know, I am, for the last year, I've been working on writing the book on the Ahimsa diet for vegans.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely support the fact that they want a better earth, and they're demanding it. Mm-hmm. And of course, I will leave the milk products out, because there's not, you know, there are many cultures that didn't drink milk.
Yes.
But there are also many cultures that did. And we have the statistics of, in India, how many millions of babies were saved from the milk of the cow. We'll talk about that story another time. But it's my desire to add the wisdom of Ayurveda to that community who hopefully can benefit from it.
The vegan community, you mean?
The vegan community,
mm-hmm.
Yes.
So in essence, what you're saying is ahimsa is multidimensional, mm-hmm. and the application of ahimsa as a personal virtue or as a virtue for the society actually can take different forms. It can be ecological ahimsa, it can be political ahimsa, it can be personal ahimsa, it can be religious ahimsa.
And right now we're in the throes of political ahimsa,
yes,
where the choices are very, very tough. Mm-hmm. You know, we have so many instances of world violence, of violence between countries, military violence, communal violence, war gangs, violence in the airplane, I mean, violence around us, violence outside at your front door. And so basically we are being pushed to understand ahimsa at its deeper level.
Fantastic. And Maya Tiwari, I know that, you know, when we look at these virtues that can transform the individual and the world and the community, particularly from Vedas, there's another virtue which is yajna, the one of sacrifice, which we can talk in another occasion.
Yes, I'd like to, because I'd like to, I've explored it in many of my books actually, but I think it can be explored further, because yajna, self-sacrifice, and I don't mean we sacrifice ourselves because
yes.
we hate ourselves,
yeah.
Self-sacrifice of giving something that is very valuable to us is actually one of the key strokes or musical bars of ahimsa, because in fact it's a phenomenal topic. I'd like us to understand better about it. For me, when we say, for instance, ahimsa with plant life, you know, we are uprooting the plant. The Jains don't, but we do. Most human beings do. Yet in Taittiriya Upanishad and also in Ayurveda, we are told that the plant was put on the earth with the principle of yajna. And so that would be so excellent to explore in our next conversation, Vijay.
Yeah, surely. I think, you know, that's a completely different conversation, but it is something to be discussed within the context of the Vedic virtues.
Of ahimsa.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this has given us some good food for thought to further explore our journey into understanding this very ancient concept, ahimsa, as how it applies to our modern lives. Thank you.
Namaste to all. Peace.